What if almost everything you've been taught about addiction is pointing you in the wrong direction? Most people are taught that addiction is a disease. It's a very common narrative. Most people believe that that's the truth of how it works. And very few people are taught why addiction actually happens. What is it? Where does it come from? And if addiction makes sense, recovery changes completely. It's a completely different journey of healing, of coming home to yourself. So in this video, we're exploring what addiction really is and where does it come from. Let's start at the beginning. Most people understand addiction through the disease model. They think that addiction is a disease and it's called an unexplainable phenomena. That means that there's a huge gap in explaining what it actually is, why people actually do or have it if it is a disease, and what causes it. But people seem to accept that. They don't need an explanation. They switch off from the why do I have it and they focus on the recovery. And that was my first introduction to addiction treatment. It was told I was a disease by a doctor. And because a doctor told me in an office in a medical center, I just thought they must be right and they must know something that I don't. So when that happens, our social hierarchy, our social perception, our social conditioning has us simply blindly believe this information that's told to us. And that was all that was known back then. I don't think people were malicious, but times have moved on. There is an understanding for addiction that makes sense. And it's not that it's an unexplainable disease. But that is not a bad thing. Many people find their way through that. I certainly found abstinence through that, but I didn't find freedom. I spent many years, more than 20 years, believing I was afflicted with an unexplainable disease that I could never recover from fully and that I had to do things in order to be okay. So this video is not against the disease model. It's really offering a different understanding, something that progresses further, that goes deeper, that really takes us to a place of being able to heal fully, to be cured fully from addiction if we're willing to go on that journey. So when I talked about my story, what we see in it is that there's an adaptive intelligence happening in the body. The body mind is not faulty. It's not wired up wrong. There's no such thing as an addictive personality. What we're responding to is what we learned in our early life. So the biological mechanism of the body is for survival first. That's the first important point. And our behavior will be wired for survival. So if in our early life, our adaptive intelligent response was that it was not okay to feel. It was not okay to feel something intense. I never learned how to be with that. If it was not okay to be me, if I had to perform to be okay, like some of us lived in an environment where we had to perform, we had to be good to be okay. So something inside of us was not accepted. Perhaps feelings were not okay. You were told don't cry, So what do you have to do with your cry when you can't cry? You shut it down inside of you and you hold it in. So that's something you have to do inside of you. But your life wants to be lived. Your intelligence flows through you. Your body mind is an intelligent organism. So then when we grow up, when we get older, this adaptive intelligence plays out in our life. If we were not allowed to cry, we probably won't show feelings and then we'll struggle with relationships. If we had to adapt like I did and use food as a way of coping, then as we get older, addiction becomes obvious. If we were not allowed to, if we had to be good and perform, what we'll find in our older life, there's no amount of performance will satisfy that need. So we'll continually end up in a loop. So it's always an adaptive, intelligent coping mechanism playing out that's keeping us from ourselves. We're disconnected from ourselves. We're performing, we're playing, we're living a facade in the world. And then there's a discomfort, a dis-ease inside ourselves. And there's many forms of that. There's not one path. There's not just trauma. There's multiple forms of trauma. There could be rape, abuse, violence, tragedy, living in a war zone, in the extremes. And there could be lack of love, lack of nurturing, lack of valuing, lack of presence. All those things also will have an adaptive intelligent response, something that forms discomfort that creates difficulty in later life. So when we look at it this way, we see that addiction starts to make sense. It's not an unexplainable phenomena, something we can't explain that comes from somewhere nobody knows, and some people have it and some people don't. Times have moved on since then. There is an explanation, and what we're getting to in this video is to see where does addiction really come from, what what happens. And it may not be obvious, these things are not necessarily explicit, i.e. we don't know about them. They are playing out in us and we don't know they're happening. So because they're painful when we're young, we squash them down and we mask over them and we kind of create this self and we live this life hiding from ourselves, not knowing. So the real recovery journey, the real healing journey is about making the implicit explicit, what we can't see, bringing it to light, or making the unconscious conscious. And this will maybe explain why so many people get addicted despite the consequences. Consequences are just not enough to stop somebody, because the relief of this moment, like right this moment, I am having an experience of pressure inside myself. The relief of this moment is much more powerful